coming to the end of our summer season, and that season is often marked by vacations and travel. So how many of you have traveled somewhere this summer? Okay, quite a few of you. And how many of you have traveled somewhere with a child in tow? Okay, and how many of you who have traveled with a child in tow have heard the phrase, while traveling, "Are we there yet?" Oh, come on, much more people than that. Yes, we have a 4-year-old in our back seat, and whenever we travel somewhere farther than 10 minutes, we hear that phrase, "Are we there yet? Are we there yet?" And I will say to him, "Ronan, just be patient." And he will say, "I am. Are we there yet?" For Ronan, patience is not a virtue. But I also think that it's not a virtue for many of us. Today, as we continue on in our Fruit of the Spirit series, we come to what may be the most difficult of all the fruit, patience and self-control. They're the most difficult because we do not wait well. We wait in lines for the bathroom, or at least all females do. Many of us wait in line for roller coasters, as we shared in the beginning, and rides at Hershey Park. We wait for a meal to happen or to purchase something. But there's other things in life that are a little harder to wait for and to be patient about, like waiting for a friend to forgive us, or for a diagnosis, waiting for a job response after an interview, or waiting for something that we have longed for our entire lives, like marriage or children. That kind of patience, when we're waiting for those kinds of things, can be nearly impossible. But I wonder, regardless of what we are waiting for, what kind of person do you become when you are waiting for something? When Paul talks about patience in Galatians, the original Greek word that he uses means long-fused. Impatience then, is the opposite. It means short-fused. And Paul thinks that the older that we become, the longer our fuse should be. Now, that may be true in some circumstances, in certain situations, but I'm not sure if it's really true for all of us. And so I want to chat about 4 different things that I think produce impatience. And be light with yourself as I share these things, okay? The first is a culture of instant gratification. If I want strawberries in the dead of winter, I can go to the grocery store and pick them up, right? Even if it's out of season, instant gratification. And gone are the days of going to Blockbuster. I did always enjoy those trips. We can, to get a movie to see if it's still available, if they haven't run out of all those DVDs. But those days are over. If we want a movie, we can rent it right off of our own televisions, or we can find it on the subscription channel that we have subscribed to. Instant gratification. We also have books or music that we can get instantly on whatever device we're on, or other physical products can also be right at our fingertips and at our doorstep in 2 days or less if we pay more, right, with an Amazon Prime account. And I don't know about you other who have Amazon Prime, but for me, if I don't see that little Prime emblem next to a product, forget it. I get so frustrated that I can't get it in 2 days because we want instant gratification. We don't want to wait. Tardiness is also a producer of impatience. Now, my husband is the best at planning ahead, and he likes to get to places ahead of time so that he can be on time. Someone slipped me a quote after the first service by someone who said that being early is being on time, and being on time is being late. But for me, I'm quite the opposite. Opposites do attract, because I wait until the very last minute that I have to be somewhere to leave. Sometimes with work, it's a little different. I do get to meetings and obviously services on time, but I wait until the last minute. And so then I get impatient if I hit traffic that makes me late, or if someone cuts me off, or if I have children that keep me late as well, when really it's just my own fault. I should have planned ahead. Is there anyone there that resonates with me on this? Okay, I'm glad that I'm not alone. But stress can be another producer of impatience. When we are at our highest stress level, we're more prone to lash out at other people, right? Or have a short temper. I know that on some of my most stress-filled days, I have to come home and work on being quiet, or else my short temper might keep me from saying something that I will later regret. And so lastly, y'all ready for this? Studies have shown that the number one producer of impatience is narcissism. How often do we get impatient when someone else slows us down? Or how often are we impatient when someone else inconveniences us? Or when someone doesn't do things in the way that we want them to be done? I don't know how many times I have thought to myself, why can't they just understand what I am trying to say? And so many times with my children, I have to remind myself to be patient and that they will do things in their own time instead of trying to rush. It's easy to be impatient because we want things our way, right? And I think that can be such a dangerous road to get on, because when we start to get into the mindset of wanting things our way, we can start to then think less of other people. And the more that we think less of others, the easier it is to think less of those who are different than us. History and the present day have proved that it never ends well. That kind of thinking never ends well, and it's not creating that kind of world that God desires for us. What kind of person do you become when you have to wait for something? There's a letter in our New Testament written to the early Christians who had quite a bit of trouble with patience as well. And so I invite you to imagine with me this world and the early Christians who are just trying to figure out what it means to be a Christian community and what it means to follow Christ. They're gathering like we do each week, sharing stories of Jesus' life on earth, about his death and resurrection and his ascension. And they reminded each other, as we do, that the story is not over, right? Jesus is going to return again. Except the only difference is, unlike us, they had eyewitness accounts of this. They didn't have the New Testament telling them about Jesus' life. The Gospels hadn't been written yet, so it was passed down or right from Jesus' disciples themselves. And they talked about how Jesus spoke of coming on the clouds with power and glory. We even read in the Gospel of Mark that Jesus said, this generation will not pass away until all of these things have taken place. And so they assumed Jesus must be returning soon. And we wouldn't endure all these challenges that we have very much longer. Right? Jesus is coming soon. Right? But as they continued to wait and wait and wait and wait, they started to ask, how soon is soon going to be? And so they received this encouragement, which we now find in 2 Peter chapter 3, verses 8 to 9. But do not ignore this one fact, beloved, that with the Lord 1 day is like 1,000 years. And 1,000 years are like 1 day. The Lord is not slow about his promise, as some think of slowness, but is patient with you, not wanting any to perish, but all to come to repentance. I think the church needs to do a better job of actively waiting and anticipating the second coming of Jesus. But I'm not going to talk about that today. That's more of Advent as we prepare for celebrating Jesus' birth. We also talk about Jesus coming again. But I wonder if any of us can get impatient with God, wondering, like these early Christians, if God has abandoned us. or if God has abandoned you because of the things that you are waiting for that aren't coming to fruition. So many things in our life don't go as planned. Bobby and the songs that we were singing reminded us of that just a few moments ago. And a lot of the reason for that is not because God wants it that way. It's quite the contrary, because the entire world is not what God planned it to be from the beginning. All that's happening in our world is not what God planned. And that's on the evil of this world. It's not on God. But as we wait, God waits with us. And in the waiting, as much as we may want to give up, in the waiting, we gain patience and resilience. And when we want to give up, God reminds us that God has never given up on us. God keeps waiting with us. So self-control. Self-control, I think, is a partner with patience. I think everyone struggles with patience, maybe not self-control as much, but maybe so. So self-control means having power over ourselves, gaining control over the things of our life. And this hits on so many levels. It hits on food, social media, television, gaming, gossiping. The list goes on and on and on. Temptation is all around us. Just a couple weeks ago, we celebrated our son Maurice's first birthday. He turned a year old the day after we moved, and that was not a good day to have a party. So we waited a little while. And in our first couple weeks here, we got a Costco membership. How many of you have a Costco membership? Yes. I'd never had one before. It's very nice, except it's impossible to buy a little of something when you go to Costco, right? So we go to Costco when we're shopping for parties, and we got an insane amount of junk food that all of our party guests did not eat. We are still working through all of that insane amount of junk food. And you know what I'm thinking about when I'm writing about self-control and junk food in my sermon is eating that junk food, trying to resist it since I'm preaching about self-control. What is difficult about self-control, I think, is that it spirals, right? When we get into, when we don't practice it, it spirals. And so Facebook first took off when I was in college. That was way back when Facebook was only for people in college. Becca remembers. It was a horrible thing, though, because you would say, okay, I have this homework to do, I need to study, but let me check my email. And then on your email, because you could only use a school address, because it was only for people in college, you would get a notification that somebody friended you on Facebook, and so you'd go on to Facebook and see who it is, and then you'd see other people who updated their profile. It was so different than it was today. There was no news feed. You just went from person to person, and then I'd see someone from high school that I'd lost contact with, and then I'd look at their profile, and after an hour, I'm there going, I have done no studying because of Facebook. The struggle was so real back then, but it's still real now as well, as social media has only grown, and there's a whole lot more people now than there was back then. But here's the thing. After we indulge in whatever it is we desire and whatever it is we struggle to control, do we really feel better? Social media isn't that fulfilling, especially if you have friends that like to be divisive on social media and they show up on your newsfeed. It is so much less than desiring, right, or fulfilling. And if I ate a large amount of junk food that is in my pantry at one time, I would feel very sick afterwards, right? We don't feel good when we overindulge. Not being able to control our impulses can keep us from so many things, from our family, from our friends, or from those things that are most important to us in our life. It seems ingrained in our human condition to want more than what we have, and so we keep gaining more than what we have. And yet the more that we indulge in it, the worse that we feel in the end. The Bible, interestingly enough, only mentions self-control 4 times. But I wonder if perhaps self-control is not so much about controlling yourself as it is about surrendering your control to God so that God is in control. Many of you may know of the 12 steps that are in Alcoholics Anonymous, or have heard that Alcoholics Anonymous goes through a 12-step plan. And it's amazing, if you look at those steps, how much they are in line with surrendering your control to God. The first 3 steps include recognizing your own powerlessness and admitting it, believing then in a power greater than oneself, and then making a decision to turn one's will and one's life over to the care of God. And from that surrender is confession, and then asking God to save us. What kind of a person do you become when you're waiting for something? As we think about surrendering and on taking on a patient heart, I invite you to 3 practices the next time you feel as if you're reaching your breaking point. The first seems a little bit simple, but it does wonders. To take a deep breath, to close your eyes, maybe as you do, to focus just on your breathing. Focus on nothing else but that, and taking that beat, that time, drops our blood pressure. Our pulse can also die down a little bit more and help us to clear our minds. The second is to check yourself. I had a friend one time who, talking about the fruit of the Spirit, would say, check your fruit. Got to check your fruit right now. Things aren't going so well. You're getting a little out of control. So to ask yourself, is what I am feeling right now a big deal? Can I hold my temper? And maybe even ask 5 years from now, how would I want myself to react to this situation? And if you can't check yourself, then call a good friend and an honest friend who might be able to check you for you. And then the last is to be grateful. So to take a deep breath, to check yourself, and then to be grateful. Some things that we wait for can be rather silly, and so it's important to really practice gratitude in those times. But other things in our life aren't fair, as I talked about before. And I don't mean to make those longings that are on our hearts light by encouraging you to just practice gratitude. Because we shouldn't be grateful for everything. If you notice in Scripture, and if you noticed in the song that we sang, I will praise you in the valleys, all the same. It didn't say, I will praise you for the valleys. God doesn't call us to be grateful for those hard times in life. Being grateful in everything, because there is so much in this world that is not understandable, but God promises to never leave us in those moments. God promises us that it is not forever, and God always fulfills God's promises. And as we're grateful for what is in our lives instead of focusing what is not, I think that we can start to see God at work in ways that we never would have noticed before. There's an author, Frederick Buechner, who once wrote, "The grace of God means something like this." And then he writes this as if God is talking. "Here is your life. You might never have been, but you are, because the party wouldn't be complete without you. Here is the world. Beautiful and terrible things will happen, but don't be afraid. I am with you. Nothing can separate us. It's for you that I created the universe. I love you." And maybe those words from God are what we need to hear and remember in order to take on patience and self-control, that God will never leave us or forsake us. So why grow impatient? I invite you to pray with me.